Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Life had settled into a rhythm, predictable, and, if I'm being honest, a little too quiet. The kids were grown and forging their own paths. My work from home routine kept me tethered to my desk, and evenings often melted into a comfortable, solitary haze of television and tea. Pleasant enough, but lacking a certain spark. My neighbor, Martha, bless her heart, was a whirlwind of activity, always gardening or hosting book club, a stark contrast to my quieter existence. We were friendly, exchanging pleasantries over the fence, borrowing the occasional cup of sugar, but our lives ran on different tracks. So, when Martha mentioned her cousin was coming to stay for a bit while he sorted some things out, I didn't think much of it. Another temporary face in the neighborhood rotation. I first saw him across the lawn a few days later. He was helping Martha wrestle a stubborn sprinkler head, his back to me initially, tall, lean, with dark hair showing threads of silver at the temples, probably somewhere in his early 50s. When he turned, wiping his brow, his eyes met mine briefly. There was a weariness in them, but also a kindness that struck me. He offered a small, polite smile and a nod before turning back to the task. Martha introduced us later that afternoon. His name was Mark. He had a firm handshake and a quiet way about him, not unfriendly, just reserved. He mentioned he was staying in Martha's spare room, helping her with some overdue house projects while he figured out his next steps after a job change. And I gathered from the pauses something more personal he didn't elaborate on. We chatted about inconsequential things: the weather, Martha's prize-winning roses, the annoying squirrel that kept raiding my bird feeder. It was pleasant, unremarkable, the kind of conversation you have a dozen times a week. I went back to my quiet house, thinking he seemed like a decent guy going through a rough patch. A couple of days passed. I saw Mark occasionally mowing Martha's lawn or tinkering in her garage. We'd wave, maybe exchange a quick hello. He kept mostly to himself. Then, one late afternoon, as I was watering my porch ferns, he walked over, wiping sawdust from his hands onto his jeans. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, painting everything in a warm, golden light. The air smelled of cut grass and honeysuckle from the vine climbing the fence. "Evening," he said, his voice low and steady. He hesitated for a moment, looking down at his boots, then back up at me. There was that same hint of weariness in his eyes, but something else too, a flicker of uncertainty. "Carol, right?" I nodded, surprised he'd sought me out. "Listen," he continued, rubbing the back of his neck. "This is going to sound, well, maybe a bit odd. Martha mentioned you appreciate older things, craftsmanship." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I do," I confirmed. "I dabble a bit in refinishing small pieces, mostly for myself." He nodded slowly. "Right. Well, I found something in Martha's garage. Belonged to my grandmother. It's an old writing desk, beautiful piece, but it's seen better days. A lot better days." He paused again, gathering his thoughts. The cicadas were starting their evening chorus, a low, thrumming sound that seemed to amplify the quiet anticipation hanging between us. "Thing is," he said, finally meeting my gaze directly, "I need to fix it. It feels important, but I've never really done anything like this before, and honestly, looking at it, I'm overwhelmed. Martha's busy, and I was wondering, just wondering, if you might consider giving me a hand, or at least some pointers. I know it's a strange ask, out of the blue." He gestured vaguely towards the garage. "I could really use another pair of eyes, someone who knows what they're doing. It's more than just a desk." There it was, the unexpected request. Not earth-shattering, Not scandalous, but definitely unusual. A near stranger asking me to spend hours in a dusty garage working on his grandmother's old desk. My quiet, predictable life suddenly had a potential detour sign flashing. My first instinct was polite refusal, an excuse about being too busy. But looking at him, standing there in the golden light, looking so earnest and a little lost, something stopped me. It wasn't just about the desk. I could tell it was about connection, about tackling something daunting, maybe about reclaiming a piece of his own history. And maybe, just maybe, I needed a little detour myself. My mind raced for a moment. Did I have the time? Did I want to get involved? It felt intimate, somehow being asked to help restore something so personal. But his vulnerability was disarming. He wasn't asking for a date or money or anything complicated. Just help with a piece of wood and history, an old writing desk. I repeated, stalling, buying myself a second. What kind of wood? What kind of condition is it in? He seemed relieved I hadn't immediately shut him down. Walnut, I think. Dark. It's structurally sound, mostly, but the finish is shot. Scratches, water rings, the works. And one of the drawer pulls is missing. He described it with a fondness that belied its dilapidated state. My grandmother used to sit there and write letters, he added softly. I remember the smell of her ink and lavender sachets. That little detail, that sensory memory, tipped the scale. It wasn't just furniture. It was a vessel of memories. And he wanted to save it. How could I say no to that? Okay, Mark, I said, surprising myself a little. I can take a look, maybe offer some advice. When were you thinking of working on it? A genuine smile finally broke through his reserve, lighting up his face. It changed his whole demeanor, chasing away some of the weariness. Whenever works for you, he said quickly. Evenings? Weekends? I'm pretty flexible. We agreed to meet in Martha's garage the following evening after I finished work. As I went back inside, the quiet of my house felt different. Not empty, but expectant. The predictable rhythm had been interrupted by a quiet, unexpected request, and I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, anticipation. The next evening, I walked over to Martha's garage just as dusk was settling. The garage door was open, spilling warm yellow light onto the driveway. Inside, Mark had cleared a space. Tools I didn't recognize were neatly arranged on a workbench, alongside cans of stripper, sandpaper, and rags. And there it was, the desk, even covered in dust and grime, layered with the patina of neglect. You could see its bones were good. Elegant, carved legs, intricate dovetail joints on the drawers, the rich, deep grain of the walnut peeking through the scarred finish. It had an air of quiet dignity, waiting patiently to be restored. Mark was standing beside it, running a hand gently over the damaged surface. She's seen better days, hasn't she? He murmured as I approached. She has, I agreed, but she's beautiful. I walked around it, examining the damage more closely. The water rings were deep, the scratches numerous. One corner was slightly chewed, as if by a long-ago puppy. The missing drawer pull left a small, lonely hole. It's definitely salvageable, I said, my practical side kicking in. It'll take work, though, a lot of sanding. He nodded. I figured as much. I just didn't know where to start. So we started. I showed him how to apply the chemical stripper, thick and goopy, explaining the importance of ventilation and patience. We worked side by side, not talking much at first, the silence filled with the scrape of putty knives against wood, the crinkle of plastic sheeting, the sharp smell of the chemicals. The garage was warm, filled with the scent of old wood, oil, and the stripper. Dust motes danced in the beam of the single overhead light bulb. It wasn't glamorous work. My hands got sticky, my clothes collected dust, but there was something incredibly satisfying about peeling back the layers of old, cracked varnish, revealing the raw wood beneath. Mark was a careful student, watching intently, asking questions, his earlier hesitancy replaced by focused effort. As we worked, conversations started to flow more easily, naturally. We didn't talk about his job situation or whatever else had brought him here, not directly. Instead, we talked about the desk. He told me stories about his grandmother, a stern but loving woman who taught him how to play chess and baked incredible apple pies. He remembered hiding under this very desk during games of hide and seek with his cousins. Each scrape of the knife seemed to uncover not just wood, but memories. I shared a bit about my own minor restoration projects. A wobbly bookcase found on the curb, a picture frame picked up at a flea market. We discovered a shared appreciation for things with history, things that had been lived with and loved. He asked about my kids, and I told him about their lives, their successes, their challenges. He listened intently, his gaze thoughtful. There was no pressure, no awkwardness, just two people working towards a common goal, sharing snippets of their lives in the quiet intimacy of the garage. We found the ghost of a label on the back, a furniture maker from a nearby town, long since out of business. Mark looked it up on his phone, fascinated by this link to the past. We worked until the light outside had completely faded, leaving only the yellow glow from the garage. My arms ached slightly from the scraping, but it was a good ache. "We made some progress," Mark said, surveying the partially stripped desk. There was a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. "Couldn't have done it without you, Carol." "We're not done yet." I smiled, "but it's a start." Walking back to my house under the starry sky, the usual quiet felt less like loneliness and more like peace. The rhythm of my life hadn't just been interrupted. It felt like a new, quiet melody was starting to play. The following evenings fell into a comfortable pattern. After work, I'd change into old clothes and head over to the garage. Mark would usually already be there, having prepped the space or started on a section we'd discussed the night before. The initial awkwardness had completely evaporated, replaced by an easy camaraderie. The scraping and stripping phase gave way to the long, meditative process of sanding. First coarse grit, then medium, then fine, smoothing away the imperfections, revealing the true beauty of the walnut grain. It was repetitive work, dusty and requiring patience, but oddly therapeutic. Our hands would often brush as we reached for sandpaper or steadied a drawer. Small, insignificant touches, yet they built a quiet awareness between us. We fell into a rhythm, working sometimes in comfortable silence, other times talking for hours. The conversation deepened. Mark started to share more about why he was here. His job hadn't just changed. His company had downsized, and his long-held position was eliminated. It had shaken his confidence, made him question his path. Around the same time, a long-term relationship had ended, leaving him feeling adrift. Restoring his grandmother's desk felt like the one tangible thing he could control, a way to rebuild something solid and beautiful from neglect. Hearing him speak so openly, with such quiet vulnerability, touched me. I found myself sharing things I hadn't articulated even to myself. The subtle loneliness that had crept in after my youngest left for college, the feeling of being slightly adrift myself, wondering what the next chapter held now that the demands of raising a family had lessened. In that dusty garage, surrounded by tools and the scent of sawdust, we created a safe space. There was no judgment, only listening and understanding. We talked about regrets and hopes, about paths taken and roads not traveled. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged more often now, and his laughter was warm and genuine. One evening, we tackled the chewed corner. It required careful filling and sanding to make it blend seamlessly. It took both of us, one holding the piece steady, the other meticulously applying the wood filler, our heads close together as we focused on the task. I was acutely aware of his presence, the faint scent of his cologne mixed with sawdust, the warmth radiating from him. It wasn't overtly romantic, but it was connected, a shared focus, a quiet intimacy built on mutual effort and burgeoning trust. Finding a matching drawer pull proved challenging. We scoured online antique hardware sites, sending links back and forth, debating styles and finishes. It became a mini quest, a shared project within the larger one. When we finally found a near-perfect match on an obscure website, Mark let out a whoop of triumph that echoed in the garage, making me laugh. The climax wasn't a single dramatic moment, but rather the gradual transformation of the desk itself, mirroring the subtle shifts happening within us. As we applied the final coats of tung oil, rubbing it carefully into the smoothed wood, the desk began to glow. The deep, rich colors of the walnut came alive, the grain patterns swirling like hidden rivers. The scars were gone, replaced by a lustrous sheen that spoke of care and attention. Standing back, looking at the restored piece, a profound sense of accomplishment washed over us. It was beautiful, elegant, imbued now not just with his grandmother's history, but with the story of its restoration, of the hours we'd spent side by side. Mark ran his hand over the smooth surface, his expression filled with a complex mix of gratitude, pride, and perhaps a touch of sadness that this part of the journey was over. "She looks incredible," he breathed, "better than I ever imagined." He turned to me, his eyes meeting mine. "Thank you, Carol, really, for everything." In that moment, the connection between us felt palpable, a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected bond we'd forged over sandpaper and shared stories. With the desk finished, gleaming under the garage light, a new kind of quiet settled between us. The shared task that had brought us together was complete. Mark carefully moved the desk into Martha's house, placing it in a spot of honor in her guest room where he was staying. Seeing it there, whole and beautiful, filled me with a quiet pride, but also a strange sense of melancholy. Our evenings in the garage were over. We stood awkwardly in Martha's hallway for a moment. "Well," Mark said, breaking the silence, "guess that's it. It turned out beautifully," I replied, meaning more than just the desk. "Thanks again, Carol, for your time, your expertise, your company." He smiled, that genuine smile that reached his eyes. It meant a lot. I thought that might be the end of it. We'd go back to being neighbors, acquaintances who waved across the lawn. The detour was over. The predictable rhythm would resume. But the next evening, Mark knocked on my door. He held 2 mugs in his hands. "Martha made chamomile tea," he said. "Thought you might like some. We could sit on the porch." We sat on my porch swing as twilight deepened, the air cool and sweet. We didn't talk about the desk. Instead, we talked about the future. Mark had started applying for jobs, feeling more optimistic than he had in months. He wasn't sure where he'd land, but the sense of drift seemed to have lessened. He felt more grounded, he said, more hopeful. He attributed much of that shift to the process of restoring the desk, the focus it gave him, the sense of accomplishment. But he also looked at me as he said it, implying my presence had been part of that grounding. 2, I spoke about my own tentative plans, maybe taking an online course, perhaps volunteering at the local library, small steps towards redefining my next chapter. Sharing these nascent ideas with him felt natural, easy, sitting there, sipping tea in the comfortable silence. I realized how much I had gained from this unexpected encounter. It wasn't just about helping him, it was about allowing myself to connect, to step outside my routine, to share vulnerability and accept it in return. It reminded me that connection can come in unexpected forms, that meaning can be found in shared tasks, however simple. It chipped away at the quiet loneliness I hadn't fully acknowledged, replacing it with a sense of quiet companionship and possibility. Mark eventually found a promising job prospect in another state. His stay at Martha's drew to a close. There was no dramatic farewell, just a heartfelt hug on Martha's driveway before he left. "Keep in touch," he asked. "Definitely. I promised." And we have. Emails, occasional phone calls, sharing updates on our lives. The connection forged in that dusty garage didn't vanish. It simply adapted to distance. Sometimes when my house feels too quiet, I think about those evenings, the scent of sawdust, the scrape of sandpaper, the low murmur of conversation under the single light bulb. I think about the unexpected gift of Mark's request, how saying yes to helping a neighbor's cousin restore an old desk ended up restoring something in me. 2, it wasn't a whirlwind romance or a life-altering adventure in the traditional sense. It was something quieter, deeper, a shared human experience that reminded me of the beauty of connection, the satisfaction of patient work, and the quiet joy of discovering that even a predictable rhythm can welcome a new, harmonious melody. My life is still relatively quiet, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels full of potential, open to the small, unexpected opportunities for connection that make life truly rich. And it all started because my neighbor's cousin asked me to join him. You really wouldn't believe what happened. Not a dramatic story, perhaps, but a meaningful one.